A struggling single dad saved an injured horse in the field, unaware its wealthy owner was watching. What if the one thing you were running from was actually the only place you were meant to be? Victoria Langley had spent her entire life building an empire, convinced that success was the only thing that mattered. Ethan Carter had spent just as long protecting what he loved, too afraid to lose again. Their worlds were never meant to collide until one stormy night changed everything. A struggling single dad, a woman trying to outrun her past, and a ranch that held the promise of a second chance neither of them saw coming. But could love really rewrite the rules they had spent a lifetime living by? Or was their story doomed to be just another beautiful mistake? If you love heartwarming stories about love, redemption, and the unexpected magic of second chances, then you're in the right place. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story filled with hope, love, and a little bit of fate. And if you're ready, let's begin. The wind howled through the open fields, bending the tall grass under its fierce command. Dark clouds churned above, pregnant with the promise of rain, while lightning split the sky in jagged flashes. Ethan Carter pulled his coat tighter around his broad shoulders, his boots sinking into the damp earth as he stepped outside his barn. He had seen storms like this before, raging, unpredictable. But tonight, something felt different. A muffled sound carried through the wind, barely discernible against the storm's fury. A low, distressed whinny. Ethan froze. His years of working with horses had trained his ears to recognize the difference between a mere call and a cry for help. This was the latter. His gaze swept across the fields beyond his ranch, searching through the curtain of rain. He couldn't see anything at first, but then, there, just beyond the tree line, a dark shape lay motionless against the ground. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed a lantern from the barn, its weak flame flickering against the wind. His instincts screamed at him to hurry. He vaulted over the wooden fence that lined his property, his legs moving on pure adrenaline as he ran toward the collapsed figure in the field. As he neared, the shape took form. A horse, a magnificent stallion, its dark coat gleaming even under the rain, though now marred with mud and sweat. Its breathing was ragged, nostrils flaring as it struggled but failed to rise. Ethan crouched beside it, his hand moving instinctively to its neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath its slick skin. "You're okay, boy. I've got you," Ethan murmured, his voice low and soothing despite the storm raging around them. The stallion's large eyes rolled toward him, filled with a mix of pain and trust. Ethan quickly assessed its legs. No obvious fractures, but it was weak, exhausted, possibly dehydrated. A saddle lay discarded a few feet away, its expensive leather torn at the seams. Whoever had been riding this horse had either fallen off or abandoned it. Ethan knew he had no time to waste. He needed to get the animal to safety before the full force of the storm hit. Bracing his feet against the muddy ground, he grasped the horse's halter and whispered, "Come on, big guy, help me out here." At first, the stallion barely moved, but after a few encouraging tugs, it groaned and pushed against the ground with its trembling legs. Ethan lent his strength, steadying the horse as it staggered upright. "That's it, good boy." Guiding the animal slowly, step by step, Ethan led it back toward his ranch. The rain pelted against them, but he focused only on getting through the storm, his grip firm and unwavering. From a distance, a sleek black SUV sat parked beneath the shelter of a large oak tree, its headlights off. Inside, Victoria Langley watched the scene unfold through the rain-streaked windshield, her manicured nails pressing into the soft leather of the steering wheel. She had been searching for her horse, Storm, for hours. When he bolted during her last ride, panic had consumed her. Storm was her prized stallion, a champion bloodline worth more than some houses. But more than that, he was the only thing she had ever truly trusted. Now, as she watched the rugged stranger, this man with strong hands and a quiet confidence, calmly leading Storm back toward his barn, something stirred within her. She'd expected to find her horse injured, scared, perhaps dead. Instead, she had found this, an act of selfless kindness. She could have called out, could have stepped out into the rain and taken control of the situation, but something held her back. This man didn't know who she was, didn't know the wealth and power her name carried, and yet he was helping anyway. No demand for payment, no hesitation. She wasn't used to people like that. Victoria tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her mind racing. She would go to him in the morning. She would demand answers. She would take back what was hers. And yet, as she watched Ethan disappear into the barn with her injured stallion, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Are you sure he's the one who needs to answer to you?" Inside the warmth of the barn, Ethan worked quickly. He dried Storm's coat, wrapped his legs, and checked for any hidden injuries. The stallion stood still, exhausted but calm under Ethan's steady hands. Lily, Ethan's 10-year-old daughter, peeked into the barn, her eyes wide with concern. "Dad?" she asked hesitantly. "Is he gonna be okay?" Ethan turned to her, brushing damp hair away from his forehead. "Yeah, sweetheart, he's just had a rough night, but he'll be fine." Lily stepped closer, gazing up at the massive horse. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Who does he belong to?" Ethan exhaled slowly, tightening the blanket around Storm's back. "That," he murmured, "is a very good question." Little did he know, the answer to that question was about to turn his life upside down. Ethan awoke before dawn, as he always did. Years of working on the ranch had trained his body to rise with the first hint of daylight. The air outside was still damp from the storm, the scent of wet earth and hay mingling in the crisp morning breeze. His first thought was of the injured stallion. Pulling on his worn flannel shirt, he made his way to the barn, his boots crunching against the gravel path. Inside, Storm stood in the same stall where Ethan had left him the night before. The horse's ears flicked forward at his approach, dark eyes watching him warily. "Well, you made it through the night," Ethan murmured, running a hand down the stallion's sleek neck. Storm had clearly been well cared for. His coat, even after the storm, shone with the unmistakable sheen of good breeding. Whoever owned him wasn't just rich. They knew horses, and they would come looking for him. Ethan sighed, reaching for a bucket of fresh oats. "Guess we'll see who you belong to soon enough." As if on cue, the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the morning silence. Ethan glanced toward the driveway just as a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the barn. The door opened, and from the driver's seat emerged a woman, tall, poised, and effortlessly elegant. She wore a fitted navy blue coat, its pristine wool, completely out of place against the rustic backdrop of his ranch. Dark sunglasses shielded her eyes, but even from a distance Ethan could tell she was assessing her surroundings with quiet authority. She strode toward the barn with a confidence that made it clear she wasn't used to waiting. Ethan leaned against the stall door, arms crossed over his chest. He had met plenty of people like her before, big city folks who didn't understand the way things worked out here. They came with their expensive clothes, their clipped tones, their expectation that money could fix everything. "I take it you're looking for a horse," he said as she stepped inside. She removed her sunglasses, revealing striking blue eyes that flickered with something unreadable. "Yes, a black stallion. His name is Storm." Ethan nodded toward the stall. "Then you're in the right place." Her gaze followed his, softening slightly when she saw the horse standing safely inside. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. For the briefest moment she looked almost relieved. Then the mask returned. "I appreciate you finding him," she said, her voice cool and controlled. I assume he's unharmed. Ethan arched an eyebrow. Aside from exhaustion and dehydration, he's lucky. If he'd been out there much longer in that storm, it could have been worse. She nodded, then turned her attention back to him. I'd like to take him now. Ethan studied her, noting the way she stood, rigid, like she was holding something. And back. He didn't know who she was, but he could tell she wasn't used to asking for things. She was used to taking them. Not a good idea, he said simply. Her head snapped back toward him. Excuse me. Storm needs rest, Ethan replied. I don't know how long he was out there before I found him, but he's not ready to be moved yet. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I have a full team of veterinarians who can handle his recovery. I'm sure you do, Ethan said evenly, but moving him too soon could do more harm than good. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension. Finally, she exhaled sharply. How long? A couple of days, at least. She hesitated, then gave a curt nod. Fine, but I'll be back. Ethan smirked. I don't doubt it. She turned to leave, but something made her pause. What's your name? Ethan Carter. A flicker of recognition crossed her features, but she masked it quickly. Victoria Langley, she said. Now it was Ethan's turn to react. Langley. The name was familiar, probably because it belonged to one of the wealthiest families in the state. He let out a low whistle. Didn't expect a Langley to be out here looking for a lost horse. Victoria's gaze didn't waver. I take care of what's mine. With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the barn floor. Ethan watched her go, a strange sense of curiosity stirring in his chest. Victoria Langley. This just got interesting. Later that morning, over breakfast, Lily sat across from Ethan at their small kitchen table, watching him intently. So, she said, poking at her eggs with a fork, who was the lady? Ethan sipped his coffee. Victoria Langley. She owns the horse. Lily's eyes widened. Wait, the Victoria Langley, the super rich one. Looks like it, she grinned. That's so cool. Ethan shook his head. It's not that exciting, kid. Are you kidding? It's like something out of a movie. A billionaire businesswoman, a small-town cowboy. Lily, Ethan warned. She giggled, then leaned forward conspiratorially. Do you think she's pretty? Ethan choked on his coffee. What? Lily shrugged. Just saying. You haven't dated anyone in forever. Eat your breakfast. Lily smirked, but said nothing more. Ethan turned back to his coffee, trying to ignore the way his daughter's words stuck with him. He wasn't looking for complications. He wasn't looking for anything. But somehow he had a feeling, Victoria. Langley wasn't going to make it easy to stay out of her way, and if he was honest with himself, he wasn't sure he wanted to. Victoria Langley sat in the back seat of her black SUV, her hands resting lightly on her lap as she gazed out the rain-speckled window. The winding country road stretched before her, lined with towering oak trees and rolling fields, still damp from last night's storm. But her thoughts weren't on the scenery. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Ethan Carter. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, unwavering, as if nothing could shake him. He hadn't been intimidated by her name, hadn't jumped to accommodate her just because she was a Langley. That alone set him apart from nearly every man she had encountered in her world. She tapped her fingers against the leather seat, a restless energy running through her. Why do I care, she thought, shaking her head. Storm was safe. That was what mattered. She should have been relieved and moved on. And yet, something about Ethan's quiet resilience unsettled her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She hated being unsettled. Back in town, Victoria stepped into her office on the top floor of the Langley Corporation headquarters. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, but the breathtaking view did little to soothe her mind. "Ma'am, you have a meeting in 10 minutes, her assistant Claire informed her as she set a folder on Victoria's desk. Victoria barely acknowledged her, instead walking to the bar cart and pouring herself a glass of sparkling water. She took a slow sip, her gaze distant. "Something on your mind?" Claire asked hesitantly. Victoria hesitated before answering. "I found Storm." Claire brightened. "That's great news. Where was he?" "On a small ranch outside town. A man found him and took care of him." Claire nodded. "I'll arrange for transport to bring him back." "No!" The word was out before Victoria could stop it. Claire blinked, surprised. "Ma'am!" Victoria exhaled. "He's not ready to be moved yet. The man, Ethan Carter, he knows what he's doing. Storm is in good hands." Claire studied her boss carefully, something knowing in her expression. Ethan Carter. That name sounds familiar. Victoria stiffened slightly. Of course it did. "His wife used to work at Langley Corporation years ago," Claire continued. "I remember when the accident happened. She was—" "That's enough," Victoria interrupted, her voice clipped. Claire nodded quickly, backing off, but the damage was done. Victoria turned back to the window, gripping her glass a little too tightly. She hadn't forgotten about Ethan Carter's wife. How could she? Meanwhile, Ethan busied himself with the day's work, but his mind wasn't on the ranch. It was on Victoria Langley. There was something about the way she had looked at Storm. Relief, yes, but also something deeper, something personal. He had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had lost too much and was afraid of losing again. He knew it well. Lily trotted into the barn, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Did the fancy lady come back yet?" Ethan chuckled. "It's been one day, Lily. You act like she's moving in." Lily grinned. "Maybe she should. She'd be good for you." Ethan shot her a look. "Not happening." Lily shrugged. "I like her. She's different. Not what I expected." Ethan had to admit he felt the same. Victoria Langley had surprised him. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. As he reached up to tighten the saddle strap, a movement in the distance caught his eye. A sleek black SUV was approaching the ranch. Ethan sighed. Speak of the devil. Victoria stepped out of the SUV with practiced grace, her sharp navy coat once again pristine despite the dusty driveway. Ethan leaned against the barn door, arms uncrossed, waiting. "You're back sooner than I expected," he said. "I like to check on things that are important to me," she replied smoothly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Storm, you mean?" Victoria's lips twitched. "Yes, Storm." She walked toward the stall, where Storm stood calmly, ears flicking as he recognized her presence. She reached out, running a careful hand down his muzzle. "You're looking better," she murmured. Ethan watched her closely. There was something different in her today, not as guarded, not as cold. "Why do you care so much about him?" he asked suddenly. Victoria hesitated, her fingers lingering against Storm's mane. "He's the only thing in my life that has never let me down," she admitted softly. Ethan wasn't sure what to say to that. It was an answer that spoke of years of disappointment, of trust shattered too many times. "I take it you've had your fair share of people letting you down," he said. Victoria gave a short, humorless laugh. "You could say that." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the quiet rustling of hay and the occasional snort from the horses. Then Victoria straightened. The moment of vulnerability was gone, replaced by her usual composure. "I'm hosting a charity gala this weekend," she said abruptly. "It's an event to raise money for equine therapy programs." Ethan tilted his head. "And you're telling me this because—" She met his gaze. "Because I want you to come." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "You want me to go to the black tie gala?" Victoria smirked. "I think you clean up well enough." Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. "Not my scene." "It's for a good cause." "Still not my scene." Victoria studied him for a moment, then sighed. "All right, but at least think about it." Ethan shook his head, but there was an amused glint in his eyes. "I'll think about it." Victoria turned to leave, but before she did, she glanced. over her shoulder. "By the way," she said, "Lily invited me for dinner." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Did she now?" Victoria smiled. "Yes, she has excellent manners. She also informed me that you make very good steak." Ethan groaned. "That kid." Victoria's smile widened. "See you at 7 then." And with that, she walked away, leaving Ethan staring after her, wondering how on earth he had just agreed to have dinner with Victoria Langley. The scent of sizzling steak filled the small kitchen as Ethan flipped the meat in the cast-iron skillet. He was used to cooking. It had been just him and Lily for years. But tonight felt different because Victoria Langley was sitting at his kitchen table. She looked completely out of place in his modest home, her tailored navy coat draped neatly over the chair, her blouse crisp despite the dust of the ranch. Yet, to his surprise, she didn't seem uncomfortable. In fact, she looked curious. Lily sat across from her, talking a mile a minute, clearly thrilled to have a guest. "And we have 12 horses on the ranch right now, but Dad says we could have more if we had extra hands. We had to let go of some workers a while." "They're back because Lily," Ethan interrupted with a warning glance. Lily ducked her head, grinning. "Oops, not supposed to talk about that." Victoria arched a brow. "Trouble keeping up with the ranch?" Ethan exhaled. "Let's just say the last few years haven't been easy." Victoria didn't press. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "You could always expand, offer riding lessons, guided tours. People would pay a lot for an authentic ranch experience." Ethan let out a quiet chuckle. "I appreciate the business advice, but this isn't a corporation, it's a home. Who says it can't be both?" Ethan had no answer for that. Lily, oblivious to the tension, grinned at Victoria. "You should stay for dessert. Dad makes the best peach cobbler." Victoria actually laughed, a soft, genuine sound Ethan hadn't expected. "Well, how could I say no to that?" The next morning, Victoria stood outside the barn, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of hay and morning dew. She had arrived, early, unannounced. She told herself she was here for Storm, but deep down she knew that wasn't the full truth. Ethan stepped out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He raised a brow when he saw her. "Didn't expect you back this soon." "I wanted to check on Storm," she said, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "And I thought, maybe I could help." Ethan studied her, clearly skeptical. "Help with what?" Victoria gestured toward the barn. "With whatever needs doing." Ethan crossed his arms, his amusement evident. "You want to help on a ranch?" She lifted her chin. "I run a billion-dollar company. I think I can handle a few chores." Ethan smirked. "All right then, city girl. Let's see what you got." 30 minutes later, Victoria regretted everything. Mucking out stalls was not something she had ever envisioned herself doing. The smell was atrocious, the work grueling, and her expensive boots, her favorite boots, were officially ruined. Ethan leaned against the barn door, watching with far too much amusement. "You doing okay there, Langley?" She shot him a glare, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This is cruel and unusual punishment." He chuckled. "It's honest work." Victoria exhaled, straightening. "I don't know how you do this every day." Ethan's expression softened. "Because it's worth it." She glanced around the ranch, taking in the golden fields stretching toward the horizon, the horses grazing peacefully. There was something undeniably real about it. A stark contrast to the cold steel and glass of the corporate world she knew so well. For the first time she understood. After finishing, or rather barely surviving, her chores, Victoria joined Ethan by the paddock, watching as Storm trotted freely. The stallion looked stronger, his coat gleaming under the morning sun. "He's doing well," Ethan commented. Victoria nodded, her arms folded. "Thanks to you." Ethan glanced at her, sensing something unspoken behind her words. "You really care about him, don't you?" She hesitated before answering. He was a gift from my father, one of the few things he gave me that actually mattered. Ethan remained silent, giving her space to continue. My father wasn't the kind of man who gave affection easily. Everything in his world was about power, control. But Storm was different. He never tried to mold him into something he wasn't. And I guess in some way, that made me believe he cared. Ethan watched her closely. And did he? Victoria gave a small, sad smile. In his own way. But it wasn't enough. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the horses move through the field. The morning sun painted the sky in hues of gold and amber, and for the first time in a long time, Victoria felt lighter. Ethan finally spoke. Not everything has to be about power, you know. Victoria turned to him. What do you mean? He met her gaze, steady and sure. You don't have to fight for control all the time. Sometimes it's okay to let people in. Victoria held his gaze for a moment longer before looking away. That's easier said than done. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. As the sun climbed higher, Victoria checked her watch. I should go. I have a lot to handle before the gala this weekend. Ethan smirked. Ah, yes, the fancy event where people in tuxedos write big checks. Victoria rolled her eyes. It's a fundraiser for equine therapy programs. Still sounds fancy. She hesitated, then, before she could overthink it, said, You should come. Ethan blinked. Excuse me. You should come, she repeated, crossing her arms. You care about horses, don't you? This is a chance to help more of them. Ethan huffed a quiet laugh. I don't exactly own a tux. Victoria smirked. I think we can arrange something. He studied her for a moment as if trying to decide if she was serious. Then, to her surprise, he nodded. All right, I'll go. Victoria wasn't sure why. That made her heart skip a beat. She quickly masked her reaction, giving him a curt nod. Good. I'll send you the details. As she walked toward her car, she heard Ethan call after her, Try not to ruin another pair of boots next time, Langley. She turned just in time to see the teasing glint in his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she laughed. Ethan adjusted the stiff collar of his borrowed tuxedo, frowning at his reflection in the small mirror mounted in the truck's sun visor. He wasn't sure what felt more unnatural, wearing a suit or driving into the heart of the city for a black tie event. What the hell am I doing? He'd spent his life on horseback, in dusty jeans and worn boots, working from sunup to sundown. The idea of stepping into a grand ballroom, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women in designer gowns, felt like walking straight into enemy territory. And yet here he was, because of her, Victoria Langley. The woman was an enigma, one moment cold and calculating, the next vulnerable in a way that made him want to understand her, to figure out what lay beneath that polished exterior. With a sigh, he pulled into the valet line outside the towering Langley Hotel. He barely had time to turn off the engine before a young man in a crisp uniform opened his door. Welcome, sir, the valet said smoothly. Ethan stepped out, feeling every inch. The outsider, as he glanced up at the glittering chandeliers visible through the massive glass entrance, he exhaled. Here goes nothing. The ballroom was even more extravagant than he had imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a golden glow over the polished marble floors. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each adorned with towering floral centerpieces. Ethan had barely made it 2 steps inside before a waiter in a pristine black suit appeared, offering him a flute of champagne. He shook his head. I'm good. You clean up well, came a smooth voice from behind him. Ethan turned, and there she was. Victoria stood at the edge of the crowd, resplendent in an emerald green gown that hugged her curves before flowing elegantly to the floor. Her dark hair was styled in soft waves, and a delicate diamond pendant rested at her collarbone. Ethan let out a low whistle. I hardly recognized you, Langley, Victoria smirked. I could say the same about you. Ethan glanced down at himself. Yeah, well, let's just say tuxedos aren't my usual thing. You wear it well, she said, and for the first time there was no teasing in her voice, just something quiet and appreciative. A waiter passed by, and this time Victoria plucked a glass of champagne from the tray, taking a slow sip before turning back to him. Nervous, Ethan scoffed. Should I be? She arched a brow. These people, they can be ruthless, Ethan shrugged. I've handled wild horses. I think I can handle a room full of rich folks. Victoria laughed softly, shaking her head. Come on, I'll introduce you to some people. For the next hour, Ethan endured polite smiles, firm handshakes, and conversations that all seemed to revolve around stock markets, acquisitions, and million-dollar deals. He listened as Victoria moved seamlessly through the crowd, her charm effortless, her confidence unwavering. He couldn't help but admire how she commanded a room. But then, as they approached a group near the bar, a familiar voice cut through. The noise. Victoria, a man drawled smoothly. You didn't tell me you were bringing a date. Ethan turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed man in his 40s with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Victoria's expression tightened just for a fraction of a second before she forced a pleasant smile. Ethan, this is Andrew Barrett. He's on the board of Langley Corporation. Andrew extended a hand, his gaze flickering over Ethan's attire. Pleasure. Ethan shook his hand, noting the calculating way the man sized him up. Andrew turned back to Victoria. Didn't expect to see you with a... He hesitated just long enough to be insulting. Rancher. Victoria's smile thinned. Ethan is my guest tonight. Andrew chuckled. Of course. And I assume you're here to bid on some of the auction items? Ethan smirked. I think I'll leave the high-stakes bidding to the experts. Andrew took a slow sip of his whiskey. Well, if you ever get tired of shoveling manure, I'm sure we could find a place for you at the company. Ethan's jaw tensed. He could handle insults, but he didn't take kindly to being looked down on. Before he could reply, Victoria stepped forward. Ethan owns one of the best ranches in the state, she said coolly, and without men like him, there wouldn't be horses to auction off tonight. Andrew's smirk faltered slightly. Didn't mean any offense, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Victoria gave him a pointed look before turning to Ethan. Come on, let's get some air. Ethan followed her out onto the terrace, where the city lights stretched endlessly before them. Friend of yours? He asked. Dryly, Victoria sighed, rubbing her temples. Andrew has always been difficult. Ethan studied her. Seems like more than that. She hesitated before answering. He was my ex-husband's business partner. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly. He's always been condescending, she admitted. Thinks money makes people superior. Ethan leaned against the railing, watching her. And what do you think? She met his gaze, something vulnerable flickering in her expression. I think money makes people believe they're invincible, and then, when they realize it doesn't, they don't know who they are without it. Ethan nodded slowly. Sounds like you've had experience with that. Victoria let out a humorless laugh. More than I'd like. A comfortable silence settled between them, the hum of the city below a stark contrast to the stillness of the ranch. Then Victoria turned to him, her expression unreadable. Why did you come tonight? Ethan considered the question. I guess I wanted to see your world, he paused before adding, and maybe I wanted you to see mine. Victoria held his gaze, and for the first time she truly saw him, not just as a rancher, not just as a man who had saved her horse, but as someone who had built something with his own hands. Someone who knew exactly who he was, and for the first time in a long time, she envied that. Ethan, she said softly, would you dance with me? He blinked. Now? She smiled. Now? Ethan exhaled, shaking his head with a chuckle. I don't dance. Victoria held out her hand. There's a first time for everything. He hesitated for only a moment before taking her hand, and as she led him back inside, through the glittering ballroom, under the gaze of 100 watching eyes, Ethan realized that maybe, just maybe, he didn't mind stepping into her world after all. The music swirled around them as Ethan held Victoria's hand, his other resting uncertainly on her waist. He wasn't a dancer, never had been, but here, in the center of a glittering ballroom filled with people who lived a life so different from his, he found himself moving with her as if he belonged. Victoria led him effortlessly, guiding him through the slow rhythm. She was composed, elegant, but there was something else beneath her polished exterior tonight, something softer. You're not half bad, she murmured, a teasing lilt in her voice. Ethan chuckled. That's because you're doing all the work. She smirked but didn't argue. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment the noise of the room faded. It was just them, moving together in a space that neither of them had expected to share. Then, as if reality had finally caught up, Victoria's expression flickered with hesitation. She slowed their movements, then gently stepped back, clearing her throat. She started, but before she could finish, a voice interrupted them. There you are. Ethan turned to see Andrew Barrett approaching, his expression tight with something that looked suspiciously like annoyance. Victoria, Andrew continued smoothly, his gaze flicking briefly toward Ethan before returning to her. The mayor is here, and he'd like a word. Ethan felt Victoria's posture stiffen beside him, but she masked it quickly, offering Andrew a cool smile. Of course, she turned back to Ethan, something unreadable in her eyes. I'll be back. And just like that, she was gone. Ethan exhaled, watching as she disappeared into the crowd of well-dressed elites. A part of him had known this moment would come, that this wasn't his world, and eventually Victoria would be pulled back into it. But for a moment, just a moment, he had let himself believe otherwise. Ethan didn't stay much longer after that. He had never been one for social events, and once Victoria was swept back into the high-stakes world of business and politics, it became clear that he had no place there. By the time he arrived back at the ranch, the stars were bright overhead, the crisp night air carrying the scent of earth and hay. It was a stark contrast to the ballroom, quieter, more real. Lily was asleep when he checked on her, curled up under a thick quilt, her bedside lamp still on. He smiled, brushing a stray curl from her face before turning off the light. As he stepped out onto the porch, he let out a slow breath. He had felt something tonight, something undeniable. But was it real, or was it just the allure of a world he didn't belong to? Before he could chase those thoughts further, the distant sound of an engine caught his attention. Headlights appeared down the gravel road leading to the ranch. A familiar, sleek black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the house. Victoria stepped out. She was still in her emerald green gown, her heels clicking against the wooden porch as she approached. But there was no trace of the composed businesswoman he had seen at the gala. Instead, she looked uncertain. Didn't expect to see you here, Ethan said, leaning against the porch railing. She hesitated, then exhaled. I didn't expect to be here either. He studied her, waiting. Victoria crossed her arms, looking away for a moment before meeting his gaze again. Tonight, I was reminded of why I left that world years ago, and why I keep getting pulled back in. Ethan nodded slowly. And which one do you want? She let out a quiet laugh. That's the problem. I don't know. For the first time since he had met her, she looked lost. Ethan hesitated before speaking. You know, the thing about horses? If you try to rein them in too tight, they fight back. But if you give them the freedom to run, they'll always find their way home. Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected metaphor. He shrugged. Maybe you just need to figure out where home is. She held his gaze, something shifting in her expression. Then, almost hesitantly, she reached for his hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, "I don't want to lose this," Ethan exhaled. "Then don't." A beat of silence. Then, softly, she said, "Okay." And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in something she hadn't dared to before, the possibility of staying. The morning light filtered through the ranch house windows, casting long golden streaks across the wooden floors. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink, staring out toward the pastures where Storm and the other horses grazed peacefully. His conversation with Victoria the night before still echoed in his mind. "I don't want to lose this." "Then don't." She had stayed longer than he'd expected, sitting with him on the porch under the quiet night sky, talking about everything and nothing at all. She had admitted, almost hesitantly, that for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she wanted to go back to her old life. Ethan wanted to believe her, but deep down, a part of him wondered how long before reality pulled her away again. A soft yawn broke through his thoughts. "Dad?" Lily padded into the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes. Her hair was a tangled mess, and she was still in her pajamas. "Morning, sweetheart," Ethan said, setting down his coffee mug and ruffling her curls. Lily blinked at him, then grinned. "Did Miss Victoria stay over?" Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. "Lily," she giggled, "I saw her car in the driveway when I woke up." Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "She just came by to talk." Lily shrugged, unfazed. "I like her." Ethan didn't respond, but Lily's words lingered, and that was what scared him, because he liked her too, more than he should. By mid-morning, Ethan was out in the pastures, checking the fence line, when he heard the sound of a car approaching. He turned, expecting to see Victoria's black SUV again. Instead, his stomach tightened. It was Andrew Barrett, the same smug businessman from the gala. The expensive silver sports car rolled to a stop just outside the barn, and Andrew stepped out, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit and polished shoes. Ethan set his jaw, already disliking whatever was about to come next. "Mr. Carter," Andrew greeted smoothly, adjusting his cufflinks. "I'm glad I caught you." Ethan crossed his arms. "I doubt that." Andrew chuckled. "Straight to the point. I can respect that." He glanced around the ranch, nodding as if evaluating a piece of property. "Nice place you've got here. Though I hear you've had some financial troubles." Ethan's fingers tightened into fists, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What do you want?" Andrew's smile didn't falter. "I have a proposal for you, one that could solve all your problems." Ethan exhaled sharply. "I'm not selling." Andrew shook his head, amused. "Who said anything about selling?" He took a slow step closer. "I know Victoria has been spending a lot of time out here, and I know she's considering some changes in her life." Ethan narrowed his eyes. Andrew smirked. "But here's the thing. You and I both know she doesn't belong here. She thinks she does, but it's only a matter of time before she realizes otherwise." Ethan's muscles tensed, but he didn't. "Speak," Andrew continued, his voice smooth as silk. "Victoria is Langley Corporation. That company is in her blood. She's built an empire, and she's not going to throw it away for some romanticized notion of a simple life." Ethan clenched his jaw. Andrew tilted his head. "So, why don't you do her a favor? Make it easy. Let her go before she gets hurt." Ethan stared at him, heart pounding. He knew exactly what Andrew was doing. The man was planting doubt, playing mind games, and the worst part, it was working. Because deep down, Ethan had already wondered the same thing. Would Victoria really stay? Or was this just a passing phase, an escape from a life she wasn't ready to give up? Before he could respond, another sound broke the silence. The sharp, panicked cry of a horse. Ethan turned sharply toward the pasture, just in time to see Storm bolt, his muscles tense, his eyes wide with fear. And in the middle of the field, tangled in the fencing, was Lily. Ethan's heart stopped. Lily! He took off running, his boots pounding against the earth as he sprinted toward his daughter. Lily was trapped. Her foot caught in the lower part of the fencing, unable to move as Storm, in his panic, reared dangerously close to her. "Lily, don't move!" Ethan shouted, his voice shaking. Terror filled Lily's wide eyes, but she obeyed. Ethan reached them in seconds, throwing himself in front of his daughter just as Storm reared again, his massive hooves slamming into the ground mere inches from where Lily lay. With steady, measured movements, Ethan reached for Storm's halter, gripping it tightly. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "You're okay." Storm's nostrils flared, his body still trembling, but Ethan didn't let go. He kept his voice calm, soothing. "Shh. You're okay, buddy." After what felt like an eternity, Storm let out a shuddering breath and finally stilled. Ethan exhaled sharply. Then he turned to Lily, who was still frozen in fear. "Sweetheart, are you hurt?" Lily shook her head, but her lower lip trembled. Ethan quickly unhooked her foot from the fencing, scooping her up into his arms. She buried her face in his shoulder, clutching onto him with shaking hands. "It's okay," he murmured, rocking her slightly. "You're safe." But as he held her, a terrifying realization settled deep in his chest. If something had happened to Lily today, he couldn't lose her. He couldn't risk losing anyone he loved again. Not Victoria, not Lily. Maybe Andrew was right. Maybe it would be easier if he let Victoria go. Maybe it was the only way to protect himself from the kind of pain he wasn't sure he'd survive again. The ranch was quiet that evening, but inside Ethan's chest a storm raged. Lily was asleep now, curled safely in her bed after the terrifying ordeal in the pasture. Ethan had checked on her half a dozen times, reassuring himself that she was truly okay, that she was still here. But the fear from earlier hadn't left him. The image of Storm rearing, his powerful hooves slamming dangerously close to his daughter, replayed in his mind on an endless loop. It was the kind of fear that settled deep in a man's bones. And then there were Andrew's words, "You and I both know she doesn't belong here. She's not going to throw it all away for some romanticized notion of a simple life." Ethan ran a hand over his face, frustration tightening his jaw. He hated that Andrew's voice had stuck with him, because deep down a part of him feared that the man was right. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He turned toward the driveway, already knowing who it was before he saw the familiar black SUV pull up. Victoria stepped out, still in her business. A tire, her heels clicking lightly against the dirt as she approached the porch. There was something different about her tonight. Her usual air of confidence seemed shaken. She stopped a few feet from him, studying his face. "Lily," she said softly, "is she okay?" Ethan nodded. "She's fine. Just scared." Victoria let out a slow breath, relief flickering in her eyes. "I wanted to check in when I heard what happened." She hesitated. "I should have been here sooner." Ethan didn't respond. She took a step closer. "Ethan!" His jaw tightened. "Andrew Barrett came by today." Victoria stilled. "What?" He had a lot to say. Ethan crossed his arms, his voice calm, but firm. "About you, about your future, about the fact that you don't belong here." Victoria's expression darkened. "Ethan—" "He's right, isn't he?" Ethan cut in. "You and I both know this is temporary. You're not staying. Here, this—" He gestured between them. "This was never meant to last." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes, hurt, surprise. "You don't get to decide that for me." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "I can't do this, Victoria. I can't put Lily through this. She's already getting attached. Hell, so am I." His voice dropped lower. "And I can't afford to lose again." Victoria's breath caught. Ethan, he shook his head. I lost my wife, and I barely held it together. For Lily, I swore I'd never let myself be in a position like that again. Victoria took another step forward. But I'm not leaving. Ethan let out a rough laugh. You say that now, but what happens when Langley Corporation pulls you back in, when your world calls you home? Victoria hesitated, and for Ethan, that moment of silence was enough. She didn't know. She wanted to stay, but she couldn't promise she would, and that was exactly the answer he had been dreading. He swallowed hard, looking away. I think it's best if we end this before it gets harder. Victoria's heart clenched. Ethan, please. But he had already stepped back, his voice quieter now. Go home, Victoria. She stood frozen for a long moment, searching his face, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Finally, without another word, she turned and walked away. The sound of her SUV pulling out of the driveway felt too final, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Victoria barely remembered the drive home. Her mind was a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, frustration. How had everything unraveled so quickly? She had known Ethan would be hesitant to let her in, but she hadn't expected him to push her away completely, and the worst part? He wasn't. Wrong. The old Victoria, the one who had been raised to believe that success meant power, would have walked away without hesitation. But that wasn't who she was anymore. Ethan had changed her. Or maybe he had just reminded her of the woman she had always wanted to be. But if he wasn't willing to take a chance, was she fighting a battle that had already been lost? Ethan woke up with a weight in his chest that he couldn't shake. He went through the motions, feeding the horses, repairing fences, helping Lily with breakfast. But everything felt off. Even Lily noticed. Dad? She asked, tilting her head. You're being weird. Ethan forced a small smile. I'm fine, sweetheart. Lily studied him, unconvinced. Is this about Miss Victoria? Ethan tensed. Lily, you made her sad. Ethan stilled. What? I saw her face when she left last night, Lily said, her voice quiet but firm. She looked like she wanted to cry. A pang of guilt hit Ethan hard. Lily hesitated. I don't think she wants to leave, Dad. Ethan's throat tightened. Lily, it's complicated. Why? Ethan exhaled. Because sometimes people have different lives, and sometimes those lives don't fit together the way we want them to, Lily frowned. That's dumb. Ethan huffed a quiet laugh despite himself. Yeah, kid, it is. But it didn't change the fact that he had made a choice, and now he had to live with it. The days after Victoria left felt longer than usual. Ethan buried himself in work, throwing every ounce of energy into the ranch, fixing fences, mending saddles, repairing the barn roof, anything to keep his hands busy, anything to keep his mind from wandering back to her. But it didn't work. At night, when the world was quiet and Lily had gone to bed, she crept back into his thoughts. The way she had looked at him that night, hurt, vulnerable, yet still fighting for something he had been too afraid to hold on to. Ethan had convinced himself he had done the right thing, that pushing her away was for the best. Then why did it feel so wrong? Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Victoria sat in her high-rise office, staring blankly at the skyline. She had thrown herself back into work, just as she always had. Meetings, contracts, negotiations. Her schedule was full, leaving no room for distractions, and yet everything felt empty. Andrew Barrett had stopped by earlier, his tone smug as he casually mentioned that he had visited Ethan. I simply told him the truth, he had said, that you belong here, not wasting time on some fantasy. Victoria had clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain composed. She should have been furious, but deep down, a small, terrifying part of her wondered. Was he right? She had fought so hard to build a life for herself, to prove that she was strong, independent, and untouchable. Had she really been willing to throw all of that away for a man who had already decided he couldn't trust her to stay? Maybe she had been fooling herself. Maybe Ethan had been right about everything. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, when the shrill sound cut through the silence. He frowned, glancing. At the clock. Too late for good news, he picked up. "Hello?" A frantic voice came through the line. "Mr. Carter, it's Doc Reynolds. Storm is missing." Ethan shot to his feet, already reaching for his boots. "What?" "He broke out of his stall at the clinic an hour ago. We've been searching, but with the storm rolling in..." Ethan didn't need to hear anything else. He grabbed his coat, his hat, and was out the door before the doctor could finish his sentence. The wind howled as Ethan rode across the open fields, rain pelting against his face. The storm was coming in fast, the sky thick with rolling thunderclouds. "Storm!" he shouted into the night, his voice barely carrying over the wind, his gut twisted. The stallion was still weak. If he was out here alone, in this weather... Ethan pushed his horse faster, his mind racing. Then through the darkness he saw it, a flash of black against the landscape. Storm stood near the edge of a rocky ravine, his body tense, nostrils flaring. His hooves skittered dangerously close to the edge, the wind whipping around him. Ethan's heart pounded. One wrong step, and Storm would fall. He dismounted swiftly, moving slowly toward the panicked animal. "Easy, boy," he murmured, keeping his voice steady. "I'm here." Storm's ears flicked, but he didn't move. Ethan took another careful step forward. "I know you're scared, but you've got to trust me, all right?" The stallion shifted, his muscles trembling. "Just hold." "Andre," Ethan whispered, "we'll get you home." Then out of nowhere, another voice called through the storm. "Storm!" Ethan whipped around, his breath catching as he saw Victoria running toward them, her hair soaked from the rain, determination etched on her face. She had come. Victoria's breath was ragged, but she didn't stop moving. She had barely registered. The phone call from Doc Reynolds, only that Storm was missing and Ethan was already out searching. Without thinking, she had gotten in her car and driven straight to the ranch, straight into the storm. And now, as she stood beside Ethan, facing the terrified stallion, something clicked into place. "This isn't how your story ends," she murmured, stepping closer. "Not like this." Storm let out a sharp exhale, his body trembling. Ethan moved beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. "He trusts you," he said quietly. Victoria swallowed hard. "Then let's bring him home." Together, step by step, they inched closer. Victoria's hand trembled as she reached out, fingers brushing against Storm's wet coat. "Come on, boy," she whispered. "It's okay." For a moment nothing happened. Then Storm took a step forward, and another. Ethan and Victoria moved carefully, guiding him away from the ravine, out of danger and back towards safety. Only when they were finally out of the storm's worst did Ethan let out a slow, shaky breath. "You okay?" he asked, turning to Victoria. She let out a short, breathless laugh. "I should be asking you that." Ethan studied her, something unreadable in his gaze. "You didn't have to come." Victoria met his eyes. "Yes, I did." And for the first time, Ethan believed her. By the time they got back to the ranch, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. They led Storm into the barn, drying him off, making sure he was settled. Then, as they stood in the quiet, something shifted. Between them, Ethan turned to Victoria, his voice softer now. "Why did you really come?" Victoria held his gaze, her heart pounding. "Because I was wrong," she admitted. "About everything. About running. About believing I had to choose. Between two worlds." She took a shaky breath. "The truth is, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll stay in the city, or if I'll stay here, or if I'll find something in between. But what I do know is that I don't want to leave you." Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't want to be scared of losing things anymore," she whispered. "I want to believe in something real." Ethan's chest ached at her words, because he knew the feeling all too well. For years he had let fear control him, But looking at Victoria now, drenched from the storm, her eyes full of something he hadn't dared to hope for, he realized he had a choice. He could push her away, or he could finally let her in. So instead of answering, Ethan did the only thing that felt right. He cupped her face in his hands, and he kissed her softly at first, then deeper, as if making up for all the time he had wasted. Victoria melted into him, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, she exhaled a shaky breath. "So, does this mean you believe me?" Ethan smiled, resting his forehead against hers. "Yeah," he murmured, "I believe you." And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid anymore. The rain had stopped by the time dawn broke over the ranch. A soft golden light stretched across the fields, casting a peaceful glow over the land. The world felt different, lighter. Victoria sat on the porch steps, wrapped in one of Ethan's old flannel shirts that he had draped over her shoulders after their long night. She watched as Storm, now safely back in the paddock, grazed contentedly alongside the other horses. Ethan emerged from the barn, his usual confident stride slower than usual, as if he were still processing everything that had happened. He leaned against the wooden railing, his eyes on her. "You always up this early?" she asked, giving him a small smile. "Ranch work starts before the sun does," Ethan replied. Then after a pause, "Didn't think you'd still be here." Victoria studied him. There was no accusation in his voice, just quiet curiosity. "I wasn't ready to leave," she admitted. Ethan nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. For years, Victoria had always known her next move. She had spent her life planning, strategizing, calculating risks. But last night, standing in the storm with Ethan, none of that had mattered. For the first time, she had chosen to stay simply because her heart told her to, and that terrified her. But it also felt right. Lily burst out of the house, her bare feet thudding against the wooden porch as she ran up to Victoria with an excited grin. "You're still here," she announced, as if it were the best news she had heard in weeks. Victoria chuckled. "I am." "Good," Lily declared, "because you never got to finish helping at the ranch. And Dad says when you start something, you finish it." Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "Lily," but Victoria laughed. "She's right, I did start something." She glanced at Ethan. "And I'd hate to leave a job half-finished." Lily beamed. "Does that mean you're staying?" Victoria hesitated. Ethan watched her closely, waiting. And then, for the first time in her life, she made a decision without overthinking it. "Yes," she said softly. "For a little while, at least." Ethan's lips quirked upward, but he didn't push for more. "Then I guess we'd better put you to work." Over the next few days, Victoria settled into a routine at the ranch. She wasn't good at everything. Mucking out stalls remained her least favorite task. But she found unexpected joy in other things. She learned how to groom the horses, how to recognize their different moods. She even started helping Lily with small training exercises, and somewhere along the way, the tension she had always carried, the weight of expectations, of proving herself, began to fade. One afternoon, as she stood outside the barn brushing Storm's mane, Ethan approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "You're not half bad at this," he admitted. Victoria smirked. "High praise coming from you." Ethan leaned against the stall door, studying her. "You're different out here." Victoria's brush stilled. "Different how?" Ethan shrugged. "More yourself. Like you're not carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." Victoria exhaled. "Maybe because, for the first time in a long time, I don't have to." She looked up at him, something unreadable in her gaze. "Do you think I could do this?" she asked, almost hesitantly. "Really do this? Be part of something like this?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I think you already are." he said softly. Victoria's breath caught, and just like that, the line between their two worlds blurred even further. But the peace didn't last. Victoria's phone rang late one afternoon while she was helping Lily prepare the feed for the horses. She almost ignored it. She had been ignoring work calls for days now, but something in her gut told her to answer. When she saw the caller ID, her stomach tightened. Andrew Barrett. She stepped away, pressing the phone to her ear. "What is it?" "You need to come back," Andrew said without preamble. "Now." Victoria stiffened. "Excuse me?" "There's a problem with the board. Some of them are questioning your commitment to the company. If you don't show up to the quarterly meeting, they might make a move to replace you." Victoria's grip tightened on the phone. "That's ridiculous. They can't just—" "They can," Andrew interrupted. "They don't think you belong here anymore, Victoria. And honestly, after the last few weeks, I'm starting to wonder if they're right." Victoria swallowed hard. "I'll handle it." Andrew's voice was smug. "That's what I thought." The call ended, but Victoria stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had fought too hard, worked too long to have everything taken from her. Now, but even as she tried to summon the old fire, the determination that had driven her for years, something inside her hesitated. Because, for the first time, she wasn't sure what winning looked like anymore. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the ranch, Victoria found Ethan sitting on the porch, staring out at the fields. She hesitated before sitting beside him. "I have to go back," she said quietly. Ethan didn't look at her. "Figured," she bit her lip, "but I don't want to." Ethan let out a slow breath. "Then don't." "It's not that simple," she murmured. "I built that company, Ethan. It's my legacy. If I walk away now, I lose everything." Ethan finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And if you stay, what do you lose?" The question hit her like a punch to the chest. She had spent so much time thinking about what she would lose if she left, that she hadn't stopped to consider what she was risking if she stayed, the life she had started to build here. The connection she had formed with Lily, the way Ethan looked at her, not as a CEO, not as a Langley, but as her. Victoria swallowed hard. "I don't know." Ethan nodded, as if he had expected that answer, and that scared her more than anything, because if she didn't make a choice soon, she might lose everything. The city skyline stretched out before Victoria, its glass towers reflecting the morning light. From her office, on the top floor of Langley Corporation, she could see everything. Miles of roads, endless buildings, the pulse of a world that had once been everything to her. But all she could think about was the ranch, the rolling pastures, the scent of fresh hay in the morning, the warmth of a kitchen filled with laughter. The way Ethan's steady hands had calmed Storm, the way Lily had looked up at her like she belonged, the way Ethan had looked at her that last night on the porch, his quiet question hanging between them. "And if you stay, what do you lose?" Victoria had thought about that question every hour since she left. And now, as she sat at the head of the conference table, staring at the board members who were discussing projections and profit margins, she realized the answer. She had spent years building this empire, proving herself, making sure she was untouchable. But what was the point of having everything if it meant having nothing that truly mattered? She stood abruptly, cutting off the CFO mid-sentence. "I'm done." The room fell silent. Andrew Barrett, seated at the far end of the table, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Excuse me?" Victoria looked around the room, exhaling a slow breath. "I'm stepping down." Murmurs broke out among the board members. Andrew's smirk faltered. "Victoria, be reasonable." "For once I am," she said firmly. "I've spent my entire life fighting for control, for power, and now I finally realize I don't want it." She met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I have something better waiting for me, and I'm not going to waste another second pretending." "This is where I belong," Andrew scoffed. "And where exactly do you belong?" Victoria smiled. "Home." Ethan stood in the middle of the pasture, hands on his hips, watching as Lily galloped across the field on one of their horses. The sky was clear, the wind carrying the crisp scent of autumn. It had been a week since Victoria left, a week of trying to convince himself that letting her go had been the right thing to do. A week of failing. He missed her. He missed the sound of her voice over morning coffee, the way she rolled her eyes at him but smiled anyway, the way she had looked at him that night after the storm like he was something worth staying for. But she had left, and he couldn't ask her to come back. She had a life in the city, a company, a world that didn't include muddy boots and early mornings spent fixing fences. But damn it, he wished she had chosen him anyway. Then, in the distance, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car approaching. His heart kicked up. Ethan turned, his breath catching as he saw the familiar black SUV pulling up the driveway, dust kicking up behind it. The door opened, and then there she was. Victoria stood there, in jeans and boots, her hair loose in the wind, looking like she had always belonged here. Lily, who had just dismounted her horse, let out an excited gasp. "Miss Victoria!" Victoria grinned as the little girl ran toward her, throwing her arms around her waist. "Hey, kiddo," she whispered, hugging her tightly. Ethan was still frozen in place, his chest tight, his mind trying to catch up with reality. Victoria met his gaze, her eyes filled with something he hadn't dared to hope for. "I'm home," she said simply, and just like that, everything fell into place. Ethan exhaled slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel as he stepped closer. "You sure?" Victoria nodded. "I walked away from the company." Ethan's brow lifted. "You what?" She laughed softly. "I left it. I don't need it anymore. I don't want it anymore." She swallowed, her voice turning softer. "I want this. I want us. If you'll have me." Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached for her, pulling her into his arms, and kissed her like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. Victoria melted against him, her fingers gripping his shirt, holding on to him like he was the only thing, keeping her grounded, and maybe he was. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, smiling. "You realize what you're signing up for, right?" Victoria smirked. "Early mornings? Hard work? No more fancy galas? Sounds perfect." Lily bounced on her heels. "Does this mean you're staying forever?" Victoria crouched down, taking Lily's hands in hers. "If that's okay with you," Lily grinned. "Best news ever." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, looks like you've got her approval." Victoria stood, slipping her hand into his. "And yours." Ethan laced their fingers together, squeezing gently. "You had it a long time ago." Victoria's smile was radiant. For the first time in her life, she wasn't chasing something she couldn't catch. She had already found it. She had found home. The ranch was alive with energy, laughter ringing through the air as guests arrived. For the grand opening of their new equine therapy program, Victoria stood beside Ethan, watching as Lily led a group of children toward the stables, her face beaming with excitement. "This was a good idea," Ethan murmured, wrapping an arm around Victoria's waist. Victoria leaned into him. "It was our idea," Ethan smiled. "Can't believe it's been a year." Victoria turned to him, her heart full. "Feels like a lifetime." He kissed her temple. "You ever miss the city?" She considered it for a moment before shaking her head. "Not for a second," Ethan grinned. "Good, because I'm not letting you go again." Victoria smirked. "Oh, cowboy, I'm exactly where I want to be." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they stood together, watching the place they had built. Not just a ranch, not just a business, but a home, a place where second chances turned into forever, and for Ethan and Victoria, forever was just the beginning. Wow, what a journey. Ethan and Victoria's story is proof that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them. But now, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what part of this story touched you the most? I'd love to know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more heartwarming tales about love, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Your support means the world, and I can't wait to share more incredible stories with you soon. Until next time, take care and stay inspired.